Hello, everybody. Happy week 9. No. Week 9. Even just clapping it up for ourselves, making it this far. All right, so we're super excited to share a little bit about what's going on in our community. So QSR is hosting a beautiful event with a beautiful, beautiful person, Abini Jones, how to take care of each other, community care in times of crisis, which will be tomorrow at the BCSC, 5:30 to 6:30. I think obviously is a very direct and beautiful line to the work of this class, and Abini is a wonderful, wonderful artist and human being, and is going to be a great facilitator for tomorrow's conversation. So QSR is hosting that. Also, we wanted to always let you know about what actions are happening. So the rollout for affordable housing. So Scope is a part of this, or Scope is leading this organization or leading this action. And so that's going to be on Thursday, which is tomorrow, and that's going to be 6 p.m. at Palo Alto City Hall. So thinking about Stanford's impact and accountability for workers in particular, for low-income folks who we know are being continually and brutally pushed out of this neighborhood.
Also, Campus Workers Coalition is hosting phone zaps this week. I think it's Thursday and Tuesday at 12 p.m. There's more information and flyers going around, but you can just phone or email in support of campus workers who are currently negotiating their contracts with Stanford. So if you want more information, there's definitely folks in the room here who know, but I can also send you an email if you just ask me.
Thank you, Gage. Perfect. Cool. Also, our artist in residence, Amara Tibor-Smith, along with one of our fellows, Allison Oddman, tomorrow at 8 p.m. are going to be doing a showing of some work in progress from Amara and Allison Oddman's first one act. So support artists on campus and your fellow peer, and that will be tomorrow at Elliott Programming Center. Want to talk about week 10?
Yeah, so next week, as promised, for students who are taking the class for 3 or 4 units, and who are completing, or for 4 units, and who are completing a final project, next week we're hosting presentations. Someone asked when we first announced this, when I said invited, what does that mean? And I was like, you have to. But actually, optional, yeah. but it's optional, and it's optional. First of all, if you're into it, then I'm going to make a form that we'll send out by Canvas. So please be on the lookout for that. We really need you to sign up in a timely manner. So please watch out for your emails, and we'll from the number of signups that we'll have, we'll figure out from there the allotted time that you'll have. And both Alana and I are willing to consult about, as well as Yeji and Evelyn and Maya, are willing to consult about how you can best make use of the time that we allot. But we're yielding to you. So we'll be sending out on Canvas a sign up for slots if you would like to present your work next week.
Mm-hmm. And we've been hearing from so many beautiful artists and scholars. So presentations are my favorite part of the year, of the quarter, because we get to hear from all of you to insert your knowledge and your wisdom and your practices into the conversations we're having in this course. So it's more a sweet tooth than a pull tooth. So come on out. Okay, cool. Okay, so we are going to do what we do every class. Just take a moment, and we're just going to ground with each other for the second to last time this quarter. Wow.
I know.
Yeah. So if you feel comfortable, please feel free to put down anything you have, both in the physical sense of putting down any baggage or any packages that you are carrying with you, but also in the symbolic and spiritual sense. And so together we're just going to start by taking a deep breath in and out with noise. Beautiful. And together one more time, deep breath in and out with noise. Recognizing that this is the 9th week of a 10-week sprint, that we deserve rest within this moment of accelerated learning, that in this moment we have everything we need. In this moment we are grounded 2 feet on the floor or in the chair. At this moment, we have air that is palatable to filter through our lungs and into our bodies. At this moment, we have community, bright, vibrant, diverse communities, working towards active decolonization, working on behalf of those who are often left out of long-range plans and university policies in terms of our future. In this moment, we have all of those who are here in body, but also all of those who are here in spirit, our ancestors, those on both sides of the veil. We welcome them into this place. All of the knowledges, the ancestral knowledge that we hold within the marrow of our bones, within our fatty tissue, within our muscles, within our jawline. We welcome each other no matter what state we show up in. We lean into the dynamics that is our lives, the fluidity that is our identities. We hold this silence just honoring this community that's gathered here. All of us who have found ourselves in this place, trying to explore these big and complex topics that have everything to do with how we move forward and have everything to do with all of us. We honor your presence in this space. And together we'll take a deep breath in, all the way in, and out with noise. One more time. Deep breath in, and out with noise. And this last time, just let go of anything that's been lodged in your jaw, lodged in your shoulders, lodged in your hips. Deep breath in, and out with noise. And we'll just sit in that space for a moment. And continue to breathe in that space for a moment. And when you're ready, feel free to come on back. Open your eyes. Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm so excited about the three guests that we have today. This course was inspired by so many different things. Jackie and I have spent, since last summer, really trying to think about how all of these intersecting ideas come together. Everything from our world to our understanding of how we can be in community together. And one of the biggest inspirations, especially around the title and thinking about conceptualizing this course, was this piece right here by Jess X. Snow. And we're so excited to welcome Jess to our space today. And so I'm going to give Jess's bio, and then I'm also going to give an introduction to another wonderful artist and healing practitioner that we have with us today, Loba Loca. And so I'm going to give 2 introductions, first to Jess, and then I'll introduce our guest, Loba Loca. So Jess, which everybody, I think at the beginning of the class we gave out these kind of takeaways. So if you want one, we have some at the Harmony House. But I want to read from the cover art and the statement that Jess makes about this work. If the earth has been brown, black, multicolored, queer and woman and indigenous and in bloom for 4.5 billion years, then what does that mean for this 1,000-year-old infant white patriarchal empire? Jess Exno. Jess is a queer Asian Canadian public artist, filmmaker, poet, and educator. Their work explores survival, memory, joy, and our relationship to the earth by amplifying the voices of women, queer people of color, and migrants who refuse to be defined by borders. So we'll hear a little bit from Jess and also about the mural that's happening at the Harmony House, which Jess and Tessa are embarking on, and also welcome you to stop by and pick up a brush if you like, maybe, perhaps, I don't know. I'm speaking out of turn. But we're super excited to kind of bring into this practice, a community practice around making our voices and our stories visible, more visible on this campus. And so if you've walked by in the last couple of days, you've seen some of that work happen. Okay, so I'm gonna actually just introduce Jess, and then I'm gonna come back up and give a warm and extended introduction to our guest for this evening, La Loba Loca. So please welcome Jess now.
Hi. I'm just really honored to be here. Like, I made the poster that this class is named after, just like randomly staying up really late at 2 a.m. like for my friends who were organizing a protest at the Women's March on Washington, and I just didn't know when I was drawing it out in my sketchbook that it would reach the people that it has reached, and it would become a part of an incredible class like this one, like one that I wish I could have taken when I was at school. So I'm just super honored to be here. Thank you, Alon and Jakia, for your incredible organizing. I wanted to begin, before I go into my work, I just wanted to share this decolonial love poem that I wrote a couple of days ago, so y'all would be the first people to hear it. So like, I guess something that I've been thinking about is I've been taking a year off of grad school at NYU because I needed to work on my mental health, because I kind of reached a breaking point where I felt like intergenerational cycles of trauma have just become so big, and it was hard for me to keep doing my work. And during this year off, I spent a lot of time healing myself and just being extra slow and taking extra good care of myself. And that's something that I was never taught to do when I was in institutions at academia, and I just couldn't believe it took me 27 years to get to a place where I was just like, I need to rest and take care of myself. So during that process, one of the biggest, and I would just say like the biggest success of my life is not any of my work, but it's just on creating a process of self-care and healing from intergenerational trauma, and like part of that healing, I've kind of decolonized a lot of the, like, my attraction to people who are not good for me, and I've become attracted to people who like fulfill me and heal me, and this poem is about that. So yeah. The cost of reincarnation. If gaze is a forest fire, then yours is the one that I give consent to consume me. Make me pure tonight, despite the blood-red sky singed with Tiananmen Square's gunfire, despite the scalpel parting the north and south so it could fit into the chalk outline of America. We don't belong here. What is a country but another wound awaiting open air? What is a nation but an infection spreading over the scabs of what was once other countries? Gaze far enough into my eyes, and you will find a grandfather hitting a father whose weathered hands teach him how to hit his own child. I never laid a hand on any human except this body, the only territory I may come home to. I want to end 7 generations of violence in one lifetime. I end that when I kiss you, our lips that come from fathers who failed us, so we fathered ourselves. Believe me when I tell you, I don't know the lands I come from. I have no home to go back to, only the creases that divide my flesh into 3 colonial nationalities, none of which know how to hold the soft parts of me, but tonight, you do. We stumble to find the perfect route to each other's skin. I kiss your ear and hear the ocean calling me home. Erode my body like water does to a shore, slowly and over centuries. Teach me with breathing how it feels to finally know the skin of another without borders. Let me salve the tattoos that you don't have, but only your ancestors may know. Let us recover the wings severed from our shoulders the day our fathers left our mothers. Their magnificent flapping, a muscle memory that our body remembers only when pushed into its own overflowing. Your touch is a meteorologist warning me of the summer I am capable of becoming if only I take the leap. And so I leapt, my lungs filling with sky, as I watched all the wars inside me end. Thank you. So that's a poem that I wrote because I have this new crush and it makes me really happy. It makes me really proud of myself for finally being attracted to someone who is kind and who is working on being decolonized. Anyways, so I've been thinking about that crush as I've been painting this mural and I'll get into this mural more at the end of this presentation, but here are some of the murals that I've done. You can follow my work on Instagram at JessXSnow, where I'll be posting things about my healing journey and just things that inspire me. And so this is me when I was 5 years old, when my mom took me back to China for the first time. And then I drew pictures of Sailor Moon because I just really wanted to be Sailor Moon. And so I just felt like I was queer even before I knew what that meant. And this is my mom and I back in 1993. My parents are first generation immigrants who survived the Cultural Revolution and came to Canada before I was born. And then when I was 5, my parents divorced and me and my mom immigrated to the U.S. and then my dad kind of left my life, and then that fracture has what is a lot of what caused me to become an artist, because that fracturing of a family across borders and not having a father is what caused me to develop a stutter, and as a result, because I wasn't able to speak. When I was younger, I found art and I found poetry and I felt like I was able to cross the borders in my art to kind of rejoin my family and create new worlds that I wasn't able to in reality. And and some of what I've been thinking about is how the same way that 5-year-old little girl who developed a stutter was able to become an artist. It takes imagination to heal our wounds, and it takes imagination to migrate, to bring a family across borders, to fall in love, to heal the broken parts of ourselves, and to start a revolution. And imagination for me is seeing the forest long before we find the right conditions to plant the seed. And I think that this kind of imagination is what migrants have to think about every time they envision a life somewhere else, or that every person who has been an activist has had to think about. So that's a lot of what I think about when I create my work. And these are just some images from an animation that I made about the Tiananmen Square massacre, and sometimes I think about in China, coming from a country where being queer is basically illegal, and all the queer communities have to be deep underground. I think about like what it means to be the first person in my family to have a voice where I'm able to be like openly queer in public without like fearing my life, and I'm able to have freedom of speech because like so many people before me weren't able to have that. So it feels like kind of like a really big responsibility, but then at the same time, like the reason why I make work is to like honor the people who came before me, to like honor my ancestors who might have been queer, but then they didn't have the space to talk about it or even like love who they want to in public. And one of the ways that I do that is through like making kind of like science fiction, magical realist films. And this is a film that I made while I was at NYU about a queer Asian American daughter of Chinese immigrants who's raised by a single mom who, after she is sexually assaulted, she develops the ability to like teleport, and like the teleportation is like a metaphor for disassociation. So she goes on dates with this really wonderful queer love, but then she like disappears before the date is over, and then this teleportation gets in the way of her forming the relationships that she wants, like with her mom and with this queer lover. So it's about her journey to like control her teleportation so she can teleport to beautiful places and not just scary places. And ultimately she is able to do that, but she manages to control her teleportation through like self-pleasure. So and I think that like this, and then I also do like protest art that you can download online, and you can like hang it up in your rooms and stuff, and also like sometimes they become murals, like this the Long Live Our 4 Billion Year Old Mother piece on the left eventually became this mural, which is called A Daughter Migrates Towards the Mother Earth. And then there's like a really young daughter figure that's made of birds, and they're like migrating towards the Mother Earth figure. And I guess it's about the idea of migration as like a coming together rather than as a way to like run away from somewhere. It's how like people become closer to their families. And yeah, and then something else that I think about is how like in a lot of academic spaces and institutional spaces, there isn't a lot of space to be vulnerable, but like when we open a space for a catharsis, and through like being vulnerable to our own truths and our own healing journeys, we're able to kind of like heal ourselves and decolonize our relationship to like capitalism. And I think that like when we make art, like when we make a mural, it's like a portal to a future that does not yet exist yet. And I think about this quote that Abuelita Marisha said, that says, "Our ancestors dreamed of us and bent reality to create us." And I've been thinking a lot about ancestors, and I think, so this is the design for the mural at Harmony House that Tessa and I are currently working on. And when we were, thank you. Okay. And when we were putting it together, like we were, when I was like putting the design together, I was thinking about this Toni Cade Bambara quote that is in the syllabus, and it says, "Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? Just so you're sure and ready to be healed." Because wholeness is no trifling matter. A lot of weight when you're well. So I imagine this kind of like ancestral figure on the right, kind of like sharing wisdom about like intergenerational healing to like the smaller figures on the left, and it's kind of like a whole like community of people who are awaiting healing and stuff. And then the flowers in the mural are like local flowers that you can only find like in California and around here. So these are California poppies and like white sage and stuff. And then like when the hands come together, like the sage blooms. And also you can see that the figure on the left like has like tears and like rain coming out of the eyes. And this is actually modeled by a student named Angel who goes to school here. And like the tears, so like I guess when the tears came in, I was thinking about how when we feel our pain and we feel our traumas, like and we let our feelings come out and we be in our bodies, like it can offer like sustenance for like these new seeds and plants. And it's like seeing the forest long before we plant the seed. So I'm really happy that I was given this opportunity thanks to the work of Alana and Yaji and Evelyn to create this mural. And I hope that it can turn Harmony House into like a haven of healing that often doesn't exist on campus and stuff. So, and also you can come and help us paint if you want to at any point this week. We're gonna be working 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So that's the end of my presentation. I guess the last thing I wanted to end with you is that like I've come to realize that my healing is tied to the healing of my community and the healing of the earth. And I didn't think that it was possible before, but now I know, and I feel it in my body that it's possible to end like generations of trauma in one lifetime if we carve space for us to do the work and if we seek the community to do so. So I wanted to bring up my friend Tessa, who has been assisting me on this mural. And in many ways, like Tessa was the person who modeled that it was possible to heal. And by like watching her healing journey, I realized that it was possible for me to heal too. And she's just been instrumental in my journey of healing. And she's just gonna speak really quickly about like her work and share a poem to end this conversation. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Jess, and thank you, IDA, for bringing us out, Lon and Evelyn and Yeji. It's just a huge honor to be here, like Jess has said, and to be part of the co-creation of this beautiful mural. So Jess invited me to share a piece, and it definitely is connected to something that was in Jess's presentation, where you're talking about being vulnerable, especially on campuses and institutions. It's definitely feels vulnerable for me to share this piece. It's actually about the body and very connected to this healing journey that I've been on, where I feel like my greatest teachers have been chronic illness, chronic overwork, PTSD, and so much like that has come into this body through all the different generations and their experiences. And so I thought this piece might be fitting to share, especially right before I know you all have finals. I speak from the bottoms of my feet. Where am I anchored? Where is my connection to the ground? This is where my ancestors walk from. My mother carried her whole weight and then some, dreams vested through her, on her feet as she walked through a remote village where she knew no one but was expected to wash their clothes. Lightly the arch presses, soft, collapsed, wanting and warning. Warning against what? Too much pressure, perhaps. What my feet tell me is that there is time. There's time to be here, to feel into what holds me, the stories of the ground. It does not have to be rushed. That's what the head wants to do, and that's why it's congested. The feet have their own timing. They hold feminine wisdom, and that is perhaps why they were bound, to keep the separation of power. It's too hard. I want to give up, to throw my hands up and stop listening to my feet. How long have I felt bowed with the lineages of expectation? What kind of creativity is possible when navigating the compressed expectations of your whole village? My parents and their parents struggled with the dual sorrow of complete obscurity, never being seen, and also the intense scrutiny of evaluation. Are you good enough? Both things hum with misrecognition. Neither gives the heart space. It's only the rare moments when I turn the gaze inward and see that I am enough that I can find the regeneration of peace. This basic goodness, the end goal of striving, but also eluding all striving. I think of my dad swishing strawberries with salt water to clean them thoroughly, my mother washing a family's worth of clothes in the river, fingers still scrubbing on weekends, knuckles swelling and cracked with the effort to do it right. They've clawed their way to a privilege that casts lots in with the man who treads heavily on our country, who encourages mobs to vandalize a Chinese church a stone's throw from my mom's congregation, and tries to shut down the job that my dad traded his teaching passion for because it was more stable. Where does basic work ethic get you? That is what I'm trying to answer with this full body fatigue, the stubborn illness that does not care how hardworking my predecessors were, how much they expect me to upkeep the relentless practice. My cells decide something else is necessary now. They've withdrawn their energy from the head and focused it below my feet. Listen, they say. Listen, listen, listen. Give it some time. Give the words a break. Let the head float away in an obscuring fog. The feet swing, tap, fidget in small unnoticed dances. The body is here. The body is here. The body has nothing to prove by taking an imperial examination or to squeeze its way into grad school fame. Shoulders rigid with father's palm pressing down. It is not here to gulp down teachings, furrow over foreign languages, speed read on holiday. It has time, it has spaciousness, it has new stories for our grandchildren. From an air of hurriedness, it prepares another kind of giving back, like trees do our carbon, to renew what is exhausted and transmute suffocated life into pearly temperance, dewdrops on the grass that was trampled, learning to breathe again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Jess. Oh, and if you want to follow Tessa, this is Tessa's information. So I just think it's so fitting that this class is sort of the culmination of our time together, but really it encompasses some of the folks that we've really modeled the course after, and this next guest is one of those folks. Deeply. When we were starting to brainstorm who we could bring out to kind of guide us through and facilitate us through these very complex but beautiful conversations, Loba Loca was one of the first folks that came to mind. And so they bring together so many different aspects, everything from reproductive justice and healing justice, autonomous healthcare to herbalism and plant medicine, gardening and sustainable living, decentering white supremacy and healing, all of these both through scholarship but also through practicing and through the practice as a healing practitioner. And so I'm going to read a little bit of the bio. I hope that's not too wild. But La Loba Loca, who goes by Loba or they, them. La Loba Loca is a queer educator, herbalist, activist. Their work encompasses Andina identity, reproductive justice, doula work, plant connections. Loba is currently located in Los Angeles, but is constantly traveling for work and to research all over Turtle Island and Latin America. They facilitate trainings and skill shares on herbalism, plant relations, social justice, healing justice, and autonomous health. Loba is invested in disseminating information, especially ancestral knowledges, with the hope that self-knowledge and recognition will create a future where we can depend on ourselves and our communities. It is my honor to introduce tonight's guest, La Loba Loca.
Thank you so much for organizing the space. When I walked in, I was like, wait, what? You eat dinner before you have a class, and then you have like a check-in question. I was like, that's amazing. I want to be part of this class. But I'm a little sick, so I have a cough drop in my mouth that I might be putting in my mouth, you know. Once this is over, I'll put another one so I'm not having a cough attack in the middle of talking for an hour. But just wanted to recognize that we're on stolen indigenous land, and also recognizing Black resistance in the territory. I'm originally from Arequipa, Peru, which is southern coastal Peru. Have you ever been to Arequipa? Or anybody here from? There's one person there, okay. So that's where my family is mostly at. That's where I was born, and I was raised there for a couple of years, and then I moved to Chile. So I was born between Chile and Arequipa, and then I came here to, you know, to California when I was older. And a little bit about my work, it's kind of a lot, you know what I mean? So I do a lot of work with plants, but also with people. Healing justice is definitely a big part of what I do. And I think like something that kind of like a theme that weaves everything together is the idea of autonomy, just like autonomous health and autonomous support networks. And what I mean by that is kind of like learning how to support each other, how to have the tools to support ourselves so we can depend a little less on the government, in the system, right? Which is so hard. And I think that I started writing sci-fi, I think like a year and a half ago, because I was having a really hard time trying to figure out what a world without capitalism looks like, right? What is a world in which the heterosexual regime doesn't exist? What is a world in which, you know, like prisons don't exist? Like, so even just asking those questions, like how does that look like? How does it smell? How does it feel? It was something that was pretty hard to imagine, and I ended up with this sci-fi that is like pretty sad, because in the sci-fi, patriarchy still exists and stuff. So, you know, it's just like even trying to imagine these new worlds, to me, end up being like so pessimistic, right? So it's interesting, because I feel like a lot of the work that I do, it's about growing plants and like, you know, just really pretty things and like, you know, collectively working together. But I feel like also my pessimist self, I don't know where it comes from, because I'm a Libra sun, but it comes from somewhere. I'm always just like, you know, so but I've seen really beautiful things in the world, you know, and just beautiful ways that people have learned to create autonomous support networks with each other. And I feel like that's also what fuels my everyday, just being like, you know what, this might look like it's all crushing and there's no way out, but at the end of it, but at least I've seen so-and-so being able to do this, or like, you know, I've seen like beautiful communities learning how to take care of each other. I've seen people, you know, having really hard conversations and being able to continue community. So that's, I think, also what kind of grounds and fuels my work. But really kind of I think the turning point of La Loba Loca as a project started when I graduated undergrad, and I was like, that was a waste of time and money. What did I learn in school? Like, you know, I went to Berkeley, and I was very much like, oh, I'm gonna go to school. I was gonna be a neuroscientist. That was the goal. I was not going to neuroscience, and I go to my first computer science class, and all this, like, you know, mostly white kids that have been learning computer science since they were 5 years old were like on their computers, and I was like, I was like, okay, I can't do this. Like, clearly this is not gonna work. So I ended up just going in a rabbit hole of like, what am I gonna do, you know? And also when you're in college, I don't know what your experience, but my experience, they were probably the worst mental health years of my life. You know what I mean? Super rough and definitely not very healthy. You know, academia is not a healthy space to be, right? So that's why I also think that it's great that we create spaces such as this, right? That kind of like talk a little bit more about what healing could look like even in academia, which is something that I feel is pretty new. I don't know. I feel like I've been seeing this more in campuses since I've been, you know, going around different schools and talking about it. But back in the day, I didn't have that, right? The conversation around healing in academia wasn't something that people were doing. But yes, I went to school, I graduated, and I had this thesis on forced sterilization of Peruvian Quechua women during the Fujimori dictatorship, which is basically something that happened between like 1980 and 2000, in which over 300,000 indigenous people were forcibly sterilized in Peru. under Fujimori, who's supposedly a president, but we all know that most presidents, if not all of them, are dictators. And so the whole focus of my thesis was like, let's talk about this, something that happened to this indigenous people. But then I graduated and I was like, okay, so how do I put this work into actual practice, right? So why do I actually take out, what is it that I kind of gain from, going through academia and writing this thesis and having this paper around, forced sterilizations? Like, how do I make this something that everybody can take something home with them, right? So like actual practical knowledge. And then I realized that college didn't really teach me any practical knowledge, except understanding that a lot of academics are just white professors that end up being very mediocre. And, and the academia makes it so that whatever they say, it's considered true. So I finished school, and then I was like, okay, so now I actually have to do the real learning. So I started going back to Peru whenever I could. So I wouldn't go anywhere. I would just save up all my money and go to Peru and hang out with my grandmas and my tias for as much time as I could, and just do research in my own community, right? So I started asking my grandmas about birthing practices, and then like, what about abortion? Then what about miscarriages? Like, how do you take care of yourself when you have BV? Like, what is it out there? What happens when somebody has a yeast infection? Like, what do you do, So really basic things. And then I started understanding that a lot of this knowledge that is around, ancestral skills, but also survival skills, were something that we weren't really taught, right? So even here right now, if let's say all supermarkets close and all major corporations that grow food close, who can go home and like has a little seed bank in their home? One person, 2 people, 3 people. Perfect. That's pretty good out of 120, but it's also very scary. Right? So when we start thinking about all the ways that really important knowledge around survival has been taken away from us, that's when you kind of start realizing that, wow, like we really need to learn all of this again, right? So kind of like relearn all of this really important knowledge around survival. And lots of times ancestral practices are survival skills, right? So even something as gossip or chisme, I always say that's an ancestral skill. You know what I mean? Like, I love gossiping, so I'm always just like, every time I come to the Bay Area, I'm like, okay, friends, what happened? You know what I mean? It's like gossip everywhere, but I think it's so important, right? It's so important, and also just, ways in which communication happens too. And this is coming from like my experience being from Peru and just seeing when my grandma would start talking shit. It was in the kitchen, and when nobody else was around, just like, oh my God, he did this, she did that, she stole my watch, like, blah, 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 you know what I mean? But then it's so healing too, to create those spaces of gossip and talking, especially with, in the case of my grandma, women that have been kind of taken, whose voices have been taken away from them. So I feel like, yeah, that to me was an ancestral practice that I always practice, gossip. But yeah, so, so once I finished, college, I had my thesis and I started learning more about ancestral skills from my family. The idea of like autonomous health kept popping up. So I grew up in Chile, and probably not now, but I want to say around 4 or 5 years ago, the autonomous abortion movement in Chile was super, super strong. So Chile was one of the countries that didn't have any kind of access to legal abortion. So even if somebody had an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy that could lead to death, it's never going to lead, to be able to be taken to full term. Like, ectopic pregnancies are like extremely dangerous. Even somebody that had an ectopic pregnancy couldn't have an abortion, right? So, and they'll have to travel or pay maybe somebody to kind of do it underground. But basically abortion was illegal in Chile, and it just became legal a year or 2 years ago, for specific cases, right? Which is also, I'm sorry, can I curse in here? Because I'm always just like, okay, perfect, sorry, but I always have to talk with, it was fucked up. It was so fucked up because a lot of those ideas of legalizing abortion in the case of Chile and other countries like Colombia is very much like only if, content warning, I'm gonna mention rape, sexual assault, So, you know, one of the cases will be only if the child is a product of rape, right? So even just having that as a clause, like you can only have an abortion if this and this and this happened, right? So at the end of the day, what we're doing is like constantly having to ask permission to the state to have an abortion, right? So what a lot of the feminists in Chile and, you know, other places in Latin America were doing is that we're trying to figure out how to have autonomous abortions. So abortions that were safe, but that didn't happen in the state, and that didn't require for people to ask permission to the state, right? Which is, to me, was like really amazing because it was all about, oh, so I don't have to ask permission to the state. And then like, who is the state? Who created the state? You know, what is it that I do every single day of my life that uphold this state, right? And sometimes even as simple as, you know, being born and having a kid and registering the kid, that's upholding the state, right? Because the kid is given a specific number, right? The kid is registered under the state. So, you know, just like things that I was like, wow, this is really trippy. Like, we're really deep in it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even need to be high. I'm just like, we're deep in it, freaking out. So, you know, and I've always been such a pessimist. So it was like, wow, you know, we're really deep in it. So what is it? Like, how do we, you know, how do we figure out how to make this better? And then, you know, I went through my like organizing. I was like organizing on self-organizing, organizing. And then something that always happens when you're always organizing, you burn out. You're just like, fuck all of these people. I did so much and now I'm dying, you know? So you go through you're breaking down for like 2 years, crying, thinking about all the time that you could have spent taking care of yourself, but you were out there trying to change the world. So definitely self-care became very important, you know? So like the idea of really understanding what self-care looks like, but not, and when I say self-care, I'm not talking about, you know, like the type of self-care that is also really annoying. Like, for example, when you have to have a really intense conversation with somebody and they're like, oh, I can't do it right now, self-care, maybe 5 months from now. And you're like, it's a very important conversation about accountability. Like, you can't hashtag self-care. You know what I mean? Like, so I think also the idea of self-care and even healing has been so misused, right? So, or even just like kind of like similarly to the use of being triggered. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm triggered by somebody's face looking at me weird, you know? And it's like, no, you're not triggered. You don't like it. You know what I mean? So even just when I guess what I'm trying to say is when people use trigger as a synonym to I'm upset or I don't like that or somebody's calling me out instead of actually what trigger is, which is really much based from PTSD, right? Like intense trauma, like a response to intense trauma, right? So even just the ways that, you know, this hashtag self-care, hashtag healing, hashtag triggered, in a way also are very similar to, how do I say this? Do you know what I mean? Like, how will you describe that into words? Anybody can describe that into words. Co-opted or misused, right? So yeah, so, you know, I think that also a lot of my work has been shaped by understanding how to take care of myself, and that's really hard. You know, it's really hard to figure out how to take care of yourself, which is like, wow, those are skills, those are ancestral skills that we should have been taught. But a lot of the times, you know, and I don't know about folks here, but in my case, a lot of the ancestral skills were always about overworking yourself. You know, like, how do you overwork yourself but not die? You know, like, how do you prevent yourself from having a panic attack? You know, kind of just like, you know, ancestral skills that weren't necessarily very much focused on like having sustainable work. And I think I'm still trying to figure that out, but also the way that I've been, you know, doing organizing and doing community work has been more and more based on like figuring out how to make my work and my energy a little bit more sustainable. So for instance, I do work and I do like healing work or consultations with folks one-on-one, but I do them less often, right? So like I try to maybe not do that much, and I do, like last time that I was, what I did last year is that I kind of gave myself specific days in which I would work with people directly, right? And then that was it. It's like, I'm sorry, I can't. You know, people contact you, well, you know, there's somebody else that can help you. You know, I can't do this right now. It's outside of my capacity. Or even trying to figure out how to make self-employment work. You know, self-employment work something sustainable. It's really hard too, and especially when you're doing healing work, it's extra hard because, of course, the people that you want to support the most are people that are not able to afford much, right? So even just the idea of like putting price into healing work, it's like another conversation that we can go on, or even just the ways in which healing work can also be extractivist, right? So an example would be white sage. That's a really good example. There's been a lot of conversations around white sage and the use of white sage in healing. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Right? So white sage being a plant that is indigenous to this part of the world, that has been just harvested so much, and then you see people just burning an entire bundle of white sage or selling white sage hydrosol or white sage essential oils, specifically when it's well crafted, right? So a lot of folks, especially indigenous people to this lands, and mostly Southern California, have been speaking up a lot about is the impact that white sage has in the environment, right? What does it mean when you can't find old white sage plants in the wild because they have been completely harvested, or they have been harvested in ways that it harms the plant? What does that mean to pollinators? What does that mean to the land, but also what does that mean to indigenous people that have been working with that plant for ages, right? So then some folks were saying, okay, well, what if we maybe don't wildcraft it, but we grow them at home and then we sell them? And then indigenous people are going to be like, no, you can't sell sacred medicine, right? So it's also just a lot of politics that I think come with healing and that come with creating different, different systems of support, and really kind of rethinking a lot of like what healing looks like and what it means in the context of capitalism, in the context of colonialism, in the context of cultural appropriation that can even happen even if we're not white, right? So like, how does cultural appropriation look like within, people of color? I hate that term because it's such a broad term, but people that are racialized in the US, how does cultural appropriation look like even within ourselves? And those are kind of conversations that have been popping up more and more and more in the healing community, just really being more mindful of how does our work and our healing work impact the earth and also other people, right? So we can't really be doing healing work if we are over-harvesting white sage, or if we're over-harvesting and using Palo Santo, for instance. That's another plant that has been, that it's in danger because people, just consume it so much. Or even ayahuasca. I don't know if you all heard of this white Canadian man who went to the Amazon and killed an old lady who was an ayahuasca healer. Have you heard of? I forget her name. I'm definitely very Aries, so I'm like, what's the name of that person? What's that book? I'm always Googling it when I'm talking, but I'm gonna Google it and then I'm gonna give it to you. So you can research more about her, but she was a healer from the Amazon that got killed. She got shot around 2 years ago because she didn't want to share more information about ayahuasca with this white man. And that happens a lot, right? So ayahuasca tourism, it's a big thing in Peru. It's a big thing in the Amazon in which people go to Peru, and then they're all about, doing ayahuasca without, or maybe they do understand where it comes from, but they just don't care. They're healing. Their personal healing is more important than the health of Mother Earth and of the communities that the medicine comes from, right? So I think that's also like such a key part of healing work. It's like, it's whatever it is that you're using for healing work, or who's helping you and facilitating healing with you, like what is the relationship to the medicine that they're using? Is that where they're from? Is that part of their traditions? Or if it's not part of their traditions, like how do they connect to it, right? So in the case of ayahuasca, in order to be able to make ayahuasca, you need very old growth. So people sometimes go towards like very old growth of plants that are, just old. So when you're cutting down plants to use medicine root, most of the time you're killing the whole plant, right? So maybe that's not the impact that has if we're talking about a community of people that have been working with ayahuasca traditionally. Maybe the impact that it has for their communities is not that much, right? But we're talking about people traveling all over the world holding ayahuasca ceremonies or ayahuasca ceremonies. It's very different, right? So it's like how to use medicine properly in the context of like a neo-colonial world, right? And thinking about colonialism and capitalism as things that are very unhealthy, right? For the environment, for Earth, for communities, and also for, for everybody involved. So that's also just another example of how, there's just so many different levels of healing work, and kind of looking at it from a more, I guess, like political framework. And yeah, and when it comes to kind of autonomous health, one of the focuses that we have when we talk about autonomous health is the idea of kind of working with what we have. So I don't know if you've ever been to any kind of curanderas or healers, but I'm talking about like old school healers, old school curanderas that don't even call themselves curanderas or healers. They're probably like the lady from like 2 blocks down, who already thinks, she's crazy. She's a bruja. She's a little witch. The crazy old lady. Anybody has ever been to that lady? You're like, yeah. What is something that you've noticed that she does, or that she would do? Like, what does she work with? Does she have white sage and palo santo just like burning up? Does she have an entire traditional atuendo that mostly seem like for performance than for nothing else? Anybody wants to kind of share their experience, how it was, or who this person was, what the connection that person had with your family? Yeah, go ahead.
I think for me, like, they had a lot of plants and like herbs and stuff, and then like the first question is like, why are you here, and like what do you need from me? Most of like healers that my family goes to is like based on touch, so sobadoras, and they usually just know by looking at you, and they just like put their hands on you and like do what they need to do. And it's in like a dingy little room. It's in like the back of the house, but yeah.
So it doesn't really look like, like full on atuendos, full on, because sometimes I feel like so much of it, especially is it in the US or is it?
Some of them are in the US, but in Honduras it's like different. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, so the first person, and I'm always really proud of this, and I'm always like, the first person that was my doctor was a traditional doctor. It was a señora that everybody thought she was crazy, and she was like my grandma's best friend, and she lived like in the neighborhood, and she basically helped birth the entire community from where I'm from. But they're usually señoras. They're usually señoras that you can go to their house at 3 a.m. and be like, oh my God, I broke my ankle, and they're like, oh my God, come here. When didn't you come before? So. And I haven't really, I've always talked about, let's create different types. We have to create new and better ways, like support systems, blah, blah. That was like my whole thing, like last year until 3 months ago, in which I was like, the way that I was born was through one of those support systems that I talk about so much, So even just like always talking about this, like we have to create this, we have to do that. And then just realizing that people have been doing that forever and will continue to do it, right? So a lot of time people are alive because of those support systems, right? Support systems that involve, curanderas or señoras de la esquina, or like, the lady next door, or the tia that can read, I don't know, like coffee, like there's just so many different ways that kind of people have related to medicine. But in my case, like something that has really helped me this last 3 months has been learning about my birth story. And my grandma passed away around 2.5 months ago, and she finally was able to remember my whole birth story like 3 months ago. So she was telling me my birth story when we were in her, in her little coffee, just like drinking coffee and tea. And she's like an old lady, so whenever I would talk to her and ask her like, hey grandma, so what do you know about ancestral Andean birth practices? She'll be like, what? Continue cooking. It's like, I have to cook, like, it's like, or like, just go get me some corn from the store. And then I'm like, okay. And like a lot of the learning from my grandma has been very much about just being with her, and just like being with her, and then trying to ask her things, and then she'll be like, what? Placenta? Okay, I'm gonna go do something else, But then she would randomly have all these moments of just kind of like just would become very como lucida, just like very like this. And then she'd be like, oh yeah, I remember I saw this one lady that was burnt alive like about 50 years ago. And I was like, what? And then I was just like writing everything like, what? Oh my gosh, she got burnt on the stake. And then, you know, and it was funny because that one story that she told me about this lady being burnt on the stake really helped me do this whole entire research around Andean witches and like the witch trials in the Andean region, which I had no idea about. For some reason in my head, I didn't think there were Andean witches in the Andean region. And when I'm talking about the Andean region, I'm talking about what's considered Bolivia, Colombia, northern Chile, Peru, Ecuador. So for some wild reason, I didn't know there were witches in the Andean region, but then my grandma told me the story of this lady being burnt alive, and I was like, oh, yeah, there were witches, you know, or like so-called witches, right? So people that the state and systems of power consider witches that were killed alive or tortured. So, you know, my grandma would have all these moments of just kind of like, is it lucid? Like lucidity, lucidez, right? Of just being like, wow, I remember all of this. I'm going to give you all this information. But that was after, you know, I tried to ask like 500 times, and then I realized that that's not the way that you learn with grandmas. You learn with grandmas by just being next to them, just kind of like, you know, either watching their telenovelas, the little soap operas, just cooking with them, or just like asking them about what's bothering them, or listening to their gossip, or, you know, listen to them talk shit about your grandpa. And then in the middle, and in the middle of all that, it's like, wow, that was really intense, grandma, thank you. You know, and just like writing down and taking making little videos of her just like doing random stuff. And I was like, wow, you know, and that to me was also really interesting because I'm like, okay, so yeah, I could never like have my grandma do a workshop on Andean medicine because she would never do that. You know, just be like, what? You know, I actually had to be with her for a long time for her to even be able to share stuff, right? And I think a lot of it probably has to do, one, because she's very smart. And that's actually a very smart way of sharing knowledge. You're kind of like, well, you want to learn, you have to hang out with me. You know? If you want to learn, then you have to give up all your vacation time to be with me. So, you know, but also, and I think also what has something to do with it is that a lot of the knowledge that like, you know, women in my family have is knowledge that is considered to not, you know, it's not academic knowledge. It's not important knowledge, right? It's not knowledge that, you know, it's valuable, right? So a lot of times I think it's both of them, right? So when they would tell me something, I would just be like writing it down and being like, oh my God, this is awesome, right? But they would just think they were just confused about me because they're like, what are you doing on your phone? And I was like, writing notes. Or taking videos. I'm like, I'm just taking a video of you so I don't forget this. So definitely, you know, like a lot of the kind of conversations that I've had with my grandmas, both of them, and just like being able to hang out with them have shaped a lot of the work that I do. But specifically the birth story that my grandma told me around 3 months ago, she was, you know, we were just sitting down and she was telling me the story. And I always have, you know, I love my grandma, and I don't want to say that my grandma was making things up, but sometimes she would have very wild stories, and then they were different depending on what year she told you the story. So I always have to cross-check. So I had to, I had my grandma, and I had my phone and WhatsApp with my mom, and I had my uncle on the side who's kind of like my grandma's, you know, like manager slash, you know, just like whenever my grandma needed something, it's like, jovencito, you know, go do this for me, you know. So he kind of knew everything, and like my grandma would always tell him all her chisme. They had a really kind of unhealthy codependent relationship, but which meant that a lot of things that I could ask my grandma, I could ask him, you know, because both of them, he knew all her life. So then she was telling me the story, and I was like, okay, how much of this is true? Calling my mom, asking my uncle, and they were kind of like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. So finally, after years of asking the birth story, everything was cross-checked and it made sense. And the birth story actually had a lot to do with La Señora Teodosa, who was also I don't even think she considered herself a curandera. You know, she was just a lady from the neighborhood that knew a whole bunch, and that because the neighborhood that we are from, it's not a rich neighborhood, and it used to be like a very much like poor working class neighborhood, which meant that accessing the medical industrial complex was like pretty much impossible, right? So what La Señora Teodosa did is that she taught herself through a lot of self-learning, and even my grandma was telling me about classes that she would just sometimes go to in downtown Arequipa and just kind of learn about, just basic healthcare stuff. She taught herself how to basically be able to provide, for her own community, right? So she makes a lot of, I think it was mostly, like her own learning from other people and other señoras. But she basically was a midwife for over 3 generations of people in my neighborhood. And even after the medical industrial complex got to our area, even after they had a hospital and there were more, just like the city grew, so there was more access to hospitals and public hospitals by the time that I was born. But even by then, like, a lot of people would go to her for little things, like, not little things, actually very major things, like my foot is out, or I broke my arm, or my clavicle is out, you know what I mean? So, or I don't know, or I think somebody's giving me mal de ojo, I think somebody's trying to curse me. So people will go to her. And what ended up happening was that my grandma, for some reason, took my mom to La Señora Teodosa's house, and La Señora Teodosa just kind of looked at my mom and was like, get on the floor. And my mom has horrible boundaries and horrible communication, so she was like, okay, I'm gonna lay on the floor. So she lays on the floor. So she just lay on the floor. Because, I feel like I would ask, at least I would be like, okay, what's going on? But also, I don't know, when an old lady's telling you to lay down, it's kind of very cultural that you just lay down. It's like, okay, well, sure, I'll lay down. So my grandma lays down, and then La Señora Teodosa kind of touches her tummy and starts turning me. So I was transverse, which means that I was like this, like my head and my legs, and this is where like my mom's vagina is at. So I was transverse. So one of the best ways that you want to be when you're going to be, giving birth to a baby is head down, right? So La Señora Teodosa moved me and put me head down, and then my mom just kind of was like, okay, what happened? That was kind of painful a little bit, but whatever. So she didn't even understand what was going on, because when I asked her, it's like, do you know what was going on? She's like, I think she said that she put you in the right place. And then I was like, okay. And then so after that, my mom went into labor around like 2 weeks after that. So my mom goes with my grandma, and this is the first time I'm the first child that she births, and my grandma goes with her, of course, because my grandma's like a Leo, I think Leo sun, and I think she's a Aries rising, and we all think she's a Cancer moon, so intense, like, just kind of like intense lady, but everybody loves her, but she's intense, and she's like all over, like, what's going on? So she goes to the hospital with my mom, and they're in the hospital, and then the doctor tells my mom, like, you have to wait because you're not gonna give birth right now. And my mom is like, no, I'm giving birth. And then the doctor's like, no, you're not. And then so the doctor leaves the room, and I know this sounds like a horror story for some, but I was so lucky this happened. So the doctor leaves the room, and it's a public hospital, so in Peru there's usually like one nurse per floor, right? You don't even want the nurses, because a lot of the nurses sometimes, I don't know how it's now, but back in the day they would go and like take your blood and sell it. Yeah, that's what happened to my mom. That's another story for another day, but she always tells me all these wild stories of how she got, she had an open heart surgery in Lima, which is like, not many people like live after that. She was telling me about this nurses called the vampires that would come and like take your blood out, like, and then just like sell it, in the underground market. It's horrible. I know, it's horrible. But, I'm like, is that also ancestral skills to steal other people's blood too and sell them for your own survival under capitalism? The things that we do, But that's another story. So going back to the other story that I was telling before, because I'm a mess when I talk. Hopefully you were able to follow at least half of what I said. So after that, my mom is like about to like pop a baby out, and my mom is like telling my grandma like, Ma, I have to, like, I can't need to push. And then my grandma's like, well, push then, so my And my grandma's like waiting for me to come out, and then I come out and everything is good. You know, finally a doctor comes and the, you know, and the nurse and everything. But I'm so happy because, and this is what I told my grandma when she told me, I was like, so basically what you're telling me is that you, like, men were absolutely not needed in none of this birthing process. So basically when I was born, I didn't need none of that. And then she was like, yeah. And I was so happy because I was like, oh my God, this is like why, this is my life. Like, I was just like, damn, this is great. And then my grandma told me about, you know, like after that happened, they came back, they went to the house, and then La Señora de Losa showed up. So basically, La Señora de Losa provided more, you know, prenatal and postpartum support than the doctor, of course, and wrapped my mom. So there's a lot of, like, you know, postpartum things that you do to the mom or the birthing parent and the baby. And, you know, so La Señora de Losa was kind of part of doing the postpartum wrapping of the belly. And then, you know, my grandma's telling me all the stories, and then I was like, okay, Grandma, so how many babies have you helped birth? Because you've told me the really wild stories of, like, señoras just having babies popping out, and you're just there helping them, you know, through the birth. I'm like, do you identify as a midwife? And she's like, no, I don't. Actually, I just think that everybody should know how to do this. Like, I'm just like, you know, I have 12 kids, and, like, you know, like, it's just everybody should know how to do this. I'm just like a regular person. I was like, wow. When she was saying this to me, I was like, that's really interesting, because that's basically what autonomous health looks like to me. You know, like, how do we, I don't like the term democratize, because it comes from the democracy, and I don't know if democracy is that real, you know, but democratization of knowledge and skills. And even just the way that, you know, like my birth story happened, to me was just really interesting, because I was like, oh, that's really awesome. So basically it was all part of some really intense, like, an intricate support network, right, that went down. Like, even from my grandma building a very close relationship to La Señora de Losa that probably took years, to my mom being able to go with my grandma for whatever reason, whether they were gossiping or just, like, dropping something off, you know, whoever knows, and La Señora de Losa see my mom's tummy. And all the years that it took for her to learn how to do, you know, flipping babies. And then from there, just like how postpartum happened, and even just like my grandma being able to support my mom during birth. That's also part of, like, you know, however many births my grandma had to attend, because, you know, this other ladies that she was supporting didn't have access to the medical industrial complex. So even just thinking of it is like, wow, that's a really intense, like, deep, interconnected web of autonomous support, you know, that this women created years and years and years ago, even before I, you know, started even thinking about what that looks like. And I think that has also, like, really, like, deeply informed the work in this past 3 months, because I've been talking about it nonstop. I've been, like, talking about my birth story. And I definitely encourage you all to learn more about your birth story if that's something you have access to, but also knowing that not a lot of people have access to talking to their families, or even, you know, sometimes births can be very, very traumatizing too, right? So just kind of understanding how all of that is shaped. But we're going to do Q&A. So if you have any questions, or if you want me to, if you didn't understand what I said, also ask that. Because sometimes I go in, like, tangents, like, all over. So feel free to ask any questions. Thank you.
If you could go into your own healing practice and journey, you both spoke to that very well, but not only the ways that you're helping community, but that and kind of what tools you bring into your practice.
Okay, so I am a gardener and a seed saver, which means that I have a little garden in my house, and I seed save. And I think part of, like, my healing practice, something that I've been doing, especially this past month, has been doing a lot of workshops around corn. And talking about corn to youth, I feel like that's, honestly, if I could just do free workshops for youth of color, specifically queer and trans youth of color, that would be, like, a dream come true, because they're all so awesome. I feel like queer, like, especially youth, are just, like, so, like, open to, like, hearing it, and especially now with the Instagram world, you know, it used to be Tumblr, now it's Instagram. They're just, like, so awake, you know, they're just like, yeah, hashtag this, hashtag that. But I think a lot of the healing work that I've been doing lately has been around like teaching folks how to grow plants, specifically corn. And the way that I talk about healing work, for me, it's, it's like how to heal each other, how to heal communities, but also how to heal relationships that we have with earth and with our foods. Specifically, corn is such an important food for people that are from this continent, but also for people, everybody, right? Because basically, corn is one of those food staples that has traveled the world. People all over the world grow corn. Other things that I do radical menstrual education. So when I first started, my focus was mostly on reproductive justice and kind of figuring out how to use low tech to help folks and to kind of learn how to be healthier. So things from steam baths to different specific herbs for like gynecological issues, and just kind of. So it's definitely kind of ended up being very much focused on menstrual health education. So I created a whole online like an online knowledge Skillshare around menstruation. So just talking about menstruation, but from a queer, non-binary, like trans experience, and talking about it from also some of the information that I was able to gather from my own family, different uses for blood, and also just kind of like witchy things around blood and menstruation. So I have kind of like compiled information in this one knowledge share. I facilitate down there steaming for folks, and I do womb sobadas or abdominal sobadas, which is basically kind of like the manipulation of organs. So you can kind of move around organs. Specifically, the way that I learned was mostly focused on the uterus. So it's actually pretty wild. If you have you ever had a sobada or like a womb massage before? Has anybody ever like moved an organ inside of you? Like, it's wild. It's wild. It's like, what? So, but just like, it's been interesting because a lot of learning from different folks, and also really catering it to who I mostly work with. And I feel like most of the folks that I work with are queer and trans people. So even if I were to learn, sobadas from the folks that I've learned the most has been like cis women that are heterosexual. So it's a lot of like translating to and being like, oh, okay, well, this is what I would say, this is how I would change my language to work with the community that I work with. And then I do some abortion support, and also like birth support here and there. Mostly, lately it's only been for like queer friends, because heterosexual sometimes a little triggering to be around too many heterosexual. It's just a little triggering. I know I shouldn't be using triggering, but it's triggering. It definitely, it's a lot for me. And what else? And I think that also part of the healing work that I do sometimes I open my schedule to do one-on-one consultations with folks. And it's interesting because sometimes people contact me to do self-employment. They kind of want to learn how to be a self-employed person or how to have their own business, and it turns into some kind of therapy session of like, you can do this. You know what I mean? Like, you have been taught that your labor has to be free. And then it's me just kind of like trying to break down the patriarchy and all these other systems that make people not feel like they can actually like, put a price to their work. So I also count that as healing work. Just even like consulting around, even something as mundane as a business, right? Because sometimes people, people contact me sometimes to do like business consultations and to kind of figure out how maybe they can do better marketing or make more money or do more social media, even though they never put those words, because most of the people that contact me are like super anti all of that, so they don't want to say it, but they're kind of like, how do I figure out how to make more money? And I'm like, are you trying to tell me that you want to make more money? And they're like, no, that sounds horrible. I'm like, yeah, but that's what you're saying. And they're like, okay, yes, so even just like accepting the horrible reality that we're in a capitalist society, but if we don't value our work, then that's also what capitalism is based off, just doing free labor and like some people capitalizing off other people's free labor. So yeah, I think that's trying to think. Oh, and then herbalism. So I do sometimes like consultations around herbs for other folks, but lately I've been trying to do or just focus more on doing workshops and kind of holding space for people to learn about plants. Because I think for me, herbalism and just kind of working with plants has been very much like me and the plant. Just like, I don't know, how do I explain this? Sometimes people are really into herbalism and they want to learn what plants can help them, I don't know, with anxiety. That's usually like one of the main things. So I usually tell them to grow a plant that's good for anxiety, and they're like, oh, okay. And I'm like, yeah, it's just do that. You can take the plant, but I feel like also the way that the medical industrial complex has taught us about health is very much like, there's this thing that's gonna help you. You know what I mean? Like, just take this and this will help you. But with plants and specifically like herbal work, I think a lot of it is about creating connections to plants. So sometimes it looks like me giving folks tea, but most of the time it looks like me telling people to have a plant, or like to go to your community garden, or to even just like connect to plants that grow around them. And I think lastly, since I'm talking too much, it would be figuring out how to create like herbal distribution systems. So I've been getting folks like, you know, like for example, Wish Garden is this big company that gave me a bunch of herbs and tinctures, and when I do workshops, I usually have them with me and I give them out to folks. So, because, you know, unfortunately, a lot of this herbal work is very much, it's expensive. You know, it's expensive to have organic herbs. It's expensive to be able to access a lot of these tinctures. If you go to Whole Foods, you might find a tincture for like $20, you know, like not everybody can access that. So even just trying to figure out how to get herbs for free to folks that need them, you know. So even if it looks like contacting companies to get stuff so I can give it out, or even just doing herbal drives. So some of the herbal drives that I was involved with last year was for the refugee crisis that is still happening, but I guess when it peaked at the beginning, when folks were just kind of doing more coverage of that in the news, just organizing herbal drives so we can get herbs from the US into Tijuana to give out to refugee folks. But yeah, that's a little bit of what I do.
Okay, so I guess like, so what was the question again? It was like, what is our, like, okay, so my healing work with other folks. So I feel like I'm primarily trained as an artist, but for me, I feel like it's healing when like queer and trans communities of color can see like faces like them and like their own stories just like on a monumental scale. And when we see like the big screen in movie theaters like filled with our faces and our stories, where we can like be our whole like unapologetic, complex, like messy selves, I think like that's healing. Because when I grew up, I never saw like my own like any faces that looked like mine on a mural, and I never saw like my experience represented in a film. But then as I've been like healing my own mental health and like writing poetry about my healing, I've been beginning to do like workshops and doing like community mural workshops where people who might not have like access to art are able to like kind of like come in as their whole creative selves and like learn how to paint a mural. And I think like slowly my healing practice has like a lot of friends like reach out to me to talk to me when they're having anxiety, or when their childhood trauma is like resurfacing, or when they're having like love problems. So I've just kind of been like holding space for like a lot of my friends when that happens. And I've been kind of keeping like a really steady meditation practice, and I've been beginning to do workshops that involve like meditation and like art making, and I guess yeah, so I guess that's the work. But I want to do more. Like I've been feeling called to do more healing, but I don't have any like training in it other than stuff that's I'm making up, and it's just like been my experiences. So.
I guess I just want to add that I think some of the most important healing you can do for other people and for the world is to really heal yourself and heal your ancestors. That's been one of the most important practices that has come to me, is like working with my well ancestors and healing those lineages. It's been incredibly healing for the people around me and for my own immediate family. Like, there's been times when I was completely estranged from my family, being a queer person of color who's born to immigrant parents. Like, we didn't talk for, probably like 2 years. And during that time, I did a lot of ancestral healing work. And that actually created changes in my immediate family, despite them not knowing that I was doing that work. So I would just say, like, there's a lot that you can do internally to affect external circumstances in the world around you.
Does anybody have any questions? We'll pass the mic around. Jeju has a mic. Anybody have any questions for any of our guests?
Hi, I think this is probably for all of you, but I recall you were mentioning trying to hold someone accountable, and then they were like, oh, self-care, I can't have this conversation right now. I feel like I'm finding that happens a lot within community, and I'm wondering if you could probably walk through like the stages of how to address that, or how you have found ways of addressing like internal harm that's done within community, and like not wanting to like outcast them or like break apart from that community.
You talk first, I'll talk. So that was my horrible ex. It's something that I learned, I was like, fuck. Like, something that I learned is that you can't have accountability unless both people want to have accountability. So that's the way accountability works, So I was just like upset, like they don't want to, blah, And I didn't even care about the accountability process. It was just, there was like a bunch of, like they stole my dog, they tried to deport me, like things that are just like, how are you doing this? Like you are, like you're like the children of migrants, like you're a brown ass queer, like what is going on? But I think like deep down, like we're all fucked up. Traumas are hella real, and the way that we decide to deal with like our pain and like our traumas has an actual real impact in how other people, like in the well-being of other people, right? So and that's also why, healing ourselves and like being really not judgmental, but really introspection, is that, just like looking at our shit, and like working through it and making it compostable so that we're not shitty people, but we actually like learn how to create, and how to like figure out new ways of like working with each other and like relating to each other is like so important. But at the end of the day, when it comes to accountability, it sucks because it's like, we're giving with this framework of accountability of like, transformative justice, blah, blah, blah. But if folks don't want to be a part of it, if folks don't want to be a part of a accountability process, then it's just not going to happen. And that's the scary thing, right? So then it's like, what is there left for us, right? If we don't want to involve the state, we don't want to involve cops, we don't want to involve, lawyers, we don't want to involve none of that, none of those structures of power. But then, we're left with this, with the idea of like, creating accountability and creating like accountability processes within each other, but then we don't want to do them because it's hard work. Like a lot of it's about looking at our shit. So I think that, you need two people or like two parties to actually be actively invested in doing that work. And also one of the things that I kind of left from that experience was like, I cannot control what this person does. Like there's no, like I can ask this person to be part of our accountability circles. They can either have, no capacity, or whatever it is that they make up in their heads. But at the end of the day, like I can't control them. So it's like, okay, so if I am called to be part of an accountability process or to have those conversations, that I can only control me being down to have those conversations, So, yeah.
So I recently was a part of this huge national convening about transformative justice, and there's a lot of resources on a website called transformharm.org, and like so I was there, and just being at that convening completely changed my life. And I would just say maybe like I've just recently been through two extremely difficult accountability processes, one with an ex and one with somebody who I was doing like a project with and stuff. And I think after going through those experiences and also being at this conference where like there were like dozens of like practitioners of transformative justice and activists coming together, like some of the main things that I learned is that like in order to like solve these things, like we need to like acknowledge that like harm is something that is very common, that like everybody can cause or everybody can receive, whether it's on a large scale or a small scale. And like people, I think Mia Mingus said something along the lines of like people are more afraid of being caught causing harm and of taking accountability than of causing the harm itself. And we need to shift as a culture to like embrace the uncomfortable and to kind of like decolonize and queer our desires, so we are okay with being uncomfortable, because comfort and growth don't like, they can't like comfort and growth don't live on the same block or something. So that was something that Mia Mingus said that really resonated with me a lot. And I think that like and also like I've heard about like just incredible examples of when like a transformative justice process goes well. Like one of my friends like told me about like an instance of harm that was caused by one of his mutual friends, and this is like an example of when like cis male allies like really show up in a way where the person who was harmed in a relationship asked these like cis male allies to like talk to the person who harmed, who was also like a cis man, and then like basically they did a thing where they like every week one of the male allies would talk to the person who harmed and like share a piece of like reading and like pair like a piece of feminist reading with like an instance of harm that was caused by that person. And then these three men, they would switch every week, and then throughout this whole process it became not just the labor of like queer people of color or like women of color who usually run accountability circles, but like men were able to like step up and educate other men. And I thought that was like an incredible story that I heard of an accountability process gone well. But I've also had a lot of experiences where like whether it's an ex or somebody who hurt me just like didn't want to take accountability, didn't want to have a conversation, and honestly all I could do was just like call in my community to like support me, and just realize that not everybody wants to be able to acknowledge the harm that they've caused, and just like it's important to realize that nobody is born somebody who causes violence or causes harm, like rapists. Nobody's born a rapist, but it's like our society that creates like conditions for violence to be passed down, and we have to think about like intergenerational solutions of ending violence and like ending rape culture and ending abuse as a community, and nobody is disposable. So yeah.
Thank you. Actually, there was can I add to? So yes, actually one of the things that you said, kind of one of the main takeaways from that specific instance was also shifting the idea of the dichotomy between like the abuser, the person that caused harm, and the person that was harmed, and also being like, well, we all have the capacity to be fucked up and to cause harm, right? So, and I think that just kind of normalizing the fact that the potential of causing harm is in all of us, but it's like also like, like, are we down to step up when we do cause harm to like be part of accountability circles or part, to figure out how to work with folks that we cause harm to. So just kind of normalizing that you can't, it's not like you're either a good person or a bad person, like you can be a good person and cause harm, so I think that's also really helpful.
Yeah, and a lot of times people who cause harm, like they've experienced the same harm, like in their upbringings and stuff, And like, so sometimes it's hard to know where that harm even begins because it's intergenerational. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, yes. Okay. So we're going to go here and then to the back, yeah? Oh, wait, sorry. Yeah, these can come. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, okay. My name's Vance. Thank you all for being here. I was wondering how you might have come to redefine family outside of the idea of a nuclear family, and how your feelings about family might have changed over time till now.
I think that when you finally, at least speaking for myself, like it was when I finally realized that I needed to give up the idea that my family was going to give me the love and the recognition and the seeing that I needed. That's what propelled me to start looking beyond them, because I feel like growing up, we're so attached to the ideas of our primary caregivers, like giving us everything that we need. And even when we don't get that, it can become a pattern of like, well, maybe if I just try harder or try do a different thing or try to be someone else other than who I am, like maybe I can get that. And so I think for me, my idea of family has really expanded to this idea of like, my family are the people who see me and who love me for who I am. And that can look like queer family, can look like chosen family that, you know, like for me, I feel like I married into a lot of family. Like my partner just happened to have family who could see me much more than my birth family could, and who harbored me for a long time. But then, you know, it's like, I think just like for me, I also have very strong feelings about relating to what you said about like monogamy and this culture of like, you should just be able to find this one person who gives you everything that you need, and that's all you need for your life. And if that doesn't work out, then it's one of your faults. And so for me, it's like family also means like polyamory and looking beyond like conventional relationship norms to being like, okay, like I'm not gonna just have this one person who's gonna give me every single thing that I need, and if they can't, then we're just not meant to be together. It's like understanding that there's so many different things that a person needs to have in a support network, and all of those things can come from different people, and that can be part of your family. It can be a community.
I forgot what I was gonna say. Can go first and come back.
So I actually love that question because I always go on like little rants on my Instagram. And one that really upsets people is my whole rant on abort your family. They're like, why? That's fucked up. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, for me, the idea of like how I have kind of like figured out how to create a healthier relationship to my family is like, I'm aborting all of them. I don't care about them. And then just through seeing how much, you know, how much they care for me and how they respect me, I've been able to create relationships with them. But after realizing and telling myself, you don't have to care for any of these people. You know what I mean? Like, but just because they have some kind of blood relation to you or like genetics, you know, whatever, that doesn't mean that that's your family. So just kind of being like, I'm aborting my family. And then from now on, I'm creating relations with them that are just based on, you know, like the feelings of like reciprocity and like feeling loved, but also just feeling, what's it called? Because, you know, taking care of, like, and that's also like another conversation around like, do I expect care labor from my mom? Why do I expect care labor from my mom? And like, she's extremely caring, but also just the idea of like expecting care labor from women in my family, it's also just like so tiring for them, I'm sure. You know, so it's just like, it's a lot of layers because I think about this all the time. But basically just like, you know, like creating those relationships outside of just being forced to love them, right? So in the case of, and like I feel like one of the like most amazing love stories has been like both of my grandmas, because I'm like, oh my God, like you really don't have to love me and you love me, like that's great. You know what I mean? So just like being like, yeah, this is like for real, it's pure. Sometimes you say fucked up shit, but at the end of the day, like I feel like our relationship is like hella real and true, you know? So, and I'm not forced to like share this love with you. And I think also family, you know, kind of like everything that you were saying, and I would just add, for me has also been creating deep relationships with plants and animals. So I grew up with a family that was like super anti pets, and then and then I got my first Chihuahua like 6 years ago. And for reals, like when I tell this to people, they get really annoyed at me, but I'm like, I love my Chihuahua more than I will ever love a human being. Like, and I tell that to my boos, and like, but for instance, my boo right now, like they understand that, if I ask them like, do you love your dog or me more? They have to say their dog, and they do love their dog more than me. And I'm like, that's a healthy relationship. When you when you love your, like your little Chihuahua, your little terrier, or whatever you have, like becomes, like, I don't know, to me, my Chihuahuas are like my love, like I feel like if I ever were to meet anybody that would just give up their Chihuahua or their animal, just to be in like, with a relationship with somebody that maybe doesn't like their animal, I'll be like, I don't trust you, like, so like to me, it's also just creating those relationships with like greater than human beings, and just being like, wow, you can really like be a family with your dog, or even just with plants. And, like I have to move a lot. And I've seen a lot of gardens that I've taken care of like be destroyed either by the city of LA or, just by gentrification, et cetera, et cetera. So even just like the love that I have for my plants and for like my seeds, or for the corn that because I try to grow corn a lot. It's also just kind of what to me feels like familial love, or just kind of like unconditional love, that I only think I could reach that level of unconditional love with my animals and my plants, so just also really finding it outside of just this kind of like overrated human to human love, honestly. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of threads connect a lot of people in this room together, because I feel like a lot of people who come into healing practices and into arts, like a lot of times our blood family wasn't the most supportive and stuff. And I think there's like a term called blood supremacy, where we're pressured to like honor our blood family and just like respect them regardless of the consequences. And I think that for me, it's been really important to acknowledge that not all families belong together, and my mom and me are so much better off without my dad, because we were like, I was raised growing up with a lot of memories of domestic violence, and the fact that, and also if I always lived with what my like family's expectations, and I took all their final word as truth, like I would definitely not be queer, and I would not be an artist. I would probably like be forced to be a lawyer, or like go to business school and like marry a straight man and have kids and have a white picket fence house, and then just like give all my money to my family so they can have vacations. And that's like not what I want. So I'm glad I didn't listen to every word that my parents have told me, because there was a lot of pressure to succumb to capitalism and like make all of their like immigration and sacrifices feel like worth it. But I'm so glad that I listened to myself, and I've become who I am today, and I've like in many ways chosen my chosen family over my blood family. And I think one day my blood family will hopefully understand and appreciate me more for it, even if that day is 20 years from now. Who knows?
And then we just have time for the final question, which came in the back somewhere close. Okay, cool. And then we'll end with some breathing and close out.
Hi. I'll try to be brief because I know we're almost at time. My question is primarily for Jess about art in the Instagram era. I'm from Minnesota, and on Earth Day, I actually saw someone share the really lovely image this class gets its name from on Instagram, like someone from my high school in Minnesota, and I was really shocked and surprised, and I was wondering if you could maybe speak to like the power and maybe the good parts of the proliferation of art on Instagram and the kind of border breaking that has, but also maybe the tension that comes with it oftentimes not being attributed to amazing artists like yourself, and yeah, the tension there.
That's a good one for both of you, perhaps.
So I think, I think in a lot of ways, like I feel really honored and flattered when an image that I make goes viral. A lot of time that's like unplanned and stuff. But I think, and it's incredible when people, when like youth in high school are able to discover it, and then they get to learn about like all the things that I talked about. But I think there's been a lot of times where like my art has not been credited, and sometimes it's like even with like collaborators who I work with and stuff, and then and I think that feels really hard. But also a lot of it is like outside of my control, because when an image becomes viral, like I don't have control of like what people post about it. So I think a lot of it is like also a process of letting go, and I guess I would say like tools like technology and tools like Instagram, like it can help an image get out there, but as long as the people who hold power in like technology spaces and like on the internet is still upheld by like white supremacy and capitalism, the power of Instagram is kind of only going to like reflect that. So we have to like shift that, and we have to shift the makers of technology, of new technology, whether it's like virtual reality or like online spaces, to the leadership of queer people of color, in order to shift a lot of the problematic things that happen with technology.
Stretch out in any way you need to. All the way in, all the way in, all the way in. And let yourself drop out noise. Have a beautiful, beautiful week 9 and week 10. And don't forget to sign up for presentations, because you could be up here next week. Yes. Thank you so much.